Hello, thank you very much for watching Amish Shakil 5858. I am Ahmed Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources. Following news have been reported by European, Asian, Australian, and African channels and AP, AFP, and Reuters news agencies. Now, the headlines. Israeli missile strike in Lebanon killing 37 people. Israel also attacked Gaza killing 14 people. Government is formed in France. Floods in Nigeria. Elections in Sri Lanka. Germany elections and far-right party. Israeli protest against Israeli government. Biden meeting with Indian, Japanese and Australian leaders. Labour government in USA, Labour conference in UK. Baby hair, billionaire Al Fayed rape charges. Now please watch the channels.
Hello, you're watching Daybreak here on France 24. I'm Yinka Yosade. Let's take a look at the headlines. After a series of blows, Hezbollah hits back, firing a barrage of rockets at an Israeli military industry complex in the city of Haifa. The Israeli army continuing to keep up the pressure with strikes on hundreds of Hezbollah targets across southern Lebanon. Marxist-leading leader Aruna Dissanayake looks to make history by becoming Sri Lanka's first leftist president after securing an early lead in elections. The incumbent Ranil Wickremesinghe currently trading behind in third place. Now let's get to work, says French Prime Minister Michel Barnier, as his cabinet is finally unveiled. The government now consisting of centrist and right-wing ministers, despite the left securing the most votes in last July's parliamentary election. Begin the program in the Israeli city of Haifa, where a military industry complex has been targeted by hundreds of rockets launched by Hezbollah. It comes after the Lebanese militant group fired dozens of missiles at a military base near Haifa on Saturday. Israel says that only 10 projectiles had crossed into the country from Lebanon and that most had been intercepted. The Israeli army has put on a show of force for its part as well, striking hundreds of Hezbollah targets across southern Lebanon. It's the latest in a wave of Israeli attacks this week that has killed dozens of people in Lebanon, including some Hezbollah commanders. Well, let's cross to Rawad Taha, our correspondent in Beirut. It's good to have you on the program, Rawad. So what have you been hearing about this latest attack from Hezbollah on an Israeli military industry complex?
Indeed, this looks like the most serious night since the start of the escalation almost 1 year ago. 11 or 12 months after the start of this war of attrition, this is starting to look very serious. So earlier in the morning hours and shortly after midnight, Hezbollah launched a series of rocket attacks deep into northern Israel, targeting a number of military bases. It is still not clear which areas were exactly targeted, but sirens went on from the border with Lebanon until reaching to the northern city of Haifa. What we know for a fact is that the rockets used are new rockets that are being used for the first time. The name of the rockets, according to Hezbollah's statement earlier today, is Fadi 1 and Fadi 2. And this is in retaliation to the pagers attack and the walkie-talkie attacks. This is as far as we know for now. The latest attacks on northern Israel is a retaliation from Hezbollah to the pagers attacks and the walkie-talkie attacks.
Rawad, you've really just laid out for us, the fact that this is the latest in these tit-for-tat attacks going on between the two sides. What's the mood like among people in Lebanon at the moment, seeing this uptick of attacks?
There is a great fear of an all-out war for the first time, perhaps over the past year. Now the Lebanese have been living on edge for the past year, with phases of escalation and de-escalation every other week or every few weeks, but nothing has been as intense as the past week when it comes to first the pagers attacks, the walkie-talkies attacks, the attack on Al Radwan elite unit of Hezbollah and its most senior military commander in Beirut's southern suburb, who they had a meeting in under a residential building leading to the death of more than 16 Hezbollah commanders and more than 40 civilians as well. So over the past week, we've seen at least three clear signs of escalations from the Israeli side. Earlier in the past few hours, we're seeing this retaliation from Hezbollah. On Saturday afternoon, we saw the highest number of airstrikes ever recorded in southern Lebanon, and attacks by Israeli jets, in particular targeting valleys and mountains where supposedly, according to Israeli statements, rocket launchers were stationed. So the past 24 hours have been definitely the worst.
Rawat Taha, correspondent in Beirut, thanks so much for that update. We really appreciate it. As tensions continue to flare between Israel and Lebanon, the US State Department is urging citizens to leave Lebanon while commercial options remain available. It's the latest appeal from authorities after they raised the US's travel advisory for Lebanon to its highest do not travel classification. Authorities are warning that if the security situation worsens, commercial options to depart may become unavailable. Next, an Israeli airstrike on a school in northern Gaza has killed at least 22 people and wounded some 30 more. Israel says the attack targeted a former school in the Sitanon area of Gaza City that was being used as a Hamas command center. The Israeli military has repeatedly accused Hamas of operating from within civilian infrastructures in Gaza, including schools, UN facilities and hospitals. Siobhan Silk has the story.
Once a school, then a place of refuge, now just rubble after a deadly Israeli strike. Gaza's civil defence agency said thousands of displaced Palestinians had been sheltering in these buildings in Gaza City, and most of those killed in the strike were children and women, at least one of whom was pregnant.
The women were sitting with their children in the playground of the school. The kids were playing. Suddenly, 2 rockets hit them. We don't know what they want from us. An unborn child is getting killed in its mother's womb.
Welcome to the Night Watch programme here on France 24. I'm Alexander Rocott. These are the top headlines this hour. Israel and Hezbollah trade fire as rescue teams continue to search for survivors in the south of the Lebanese capital, a day after the IDF airstrike on the group's top commanders. At least 22 Palestinians are killed in an airstrike at a school in Gaza. Israel said the building had been converted for use as a Hamas command center. And after more than 2 months of political deadlock, France finally has a government, marking a shift to the right, despite the left-wing bloc winning the most seats in the National Assembly. We begin in Lebanon, where Israel and Hezbollah exchanged fire on Saturday, while rescue crews in southern Beirut were still searching for survivors from the airstrike a day earlier, where senior Hezbollah commanders were targeted. At least 37 people were killed in that attack that took down a 9-story building in a densely populated neighborhood. Among the casualties were 16 Hezbollah members, according to the group itself, including 2 top commanders, but also a number of women and children. Our senior reporter James Andre earlier sent us this update from Beirut.
This is Asia Now.
It's 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi, and 10 o'clock in Jakarta. Good morning. I'm Rani Samtani. At this hour, Sri Lanka is tallying the votes from yesterday's presidential election. Marxist politician Anura Kumara Dissanayaka appears to be taking an early lead in the race. Quad leaders push for maritime security cooperation as they raise concerns about tensions in the East and South China Seas. The grouping released a joint statement following President Joe Biden's farewell summit in Delaware. And Israeli warplanes launch powerful air raids on southern Lebanon as fears of an all-out war escalate. The U.S. is urging its citizens to leave Lebanon while flights are still available. Sri Lankan authorities have extended a nationwide curfew to midday local time as vote counting continues after yesterday's presidential election. Marxist-leaning leader Anura Kumara Dissanayaka has grabbed a comfortable lead in the race. Data from the Election Commission shows the 55-year-old has won about 53% of the 1 million votes counted so far. Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa is trailing with 22%, while incumbent President Ranil Wickremesinghe is in third place. Millions more votes are yet to be counted. Officials say about 76% of eligible voters turned up. The final results are expected to be announced later today. Many are pinning hopes of a better future on the next leader as Sri Lanka struggles to recover from its worst economic crisis and the resulting political upheaval. For the latest, Maneksha Boram.
This is DW News live from Berlin. Tens of thousands demonstrate across Israel demanding a ceasefire in the Gaza war and a return of the hostages. But many families of the captives fear the Netanyahu administration is turning its attention to Lebanon, where the Israeli military is stepping up efforts to stop Hezbollah attacks. Also coming up. All eyes on the far right as voters prepare for regional elections in Germany's eastern state of Brandenburg. The right-wing Alternative for Germany has a good chance of emerging as the largest party. Plus,
as the floodwaters begin to recede, what's now left in its wake is a trail of damage. These homes were completely submerged when the waters hit.
Nigerians are left to pick up the pieces after flooding inundates the city of Maiduguri. Hundreds of thousands of people are forced from their homes after a dam collapses. I'm Pablo Folielias. Welcome to the programme. Lebanon's Hezbollah says it has fired dozens of missiles at an airbase deep in northern Israel. The Iran-backed militia said the attack was in response to a wave of Israeli airstrikes on southern Lebanon. Cross-border exchanges have ramped up again this week after an Israeli strike on a Beirut apartment building killed top Hezbollah commanders on Friday. Lebanese authorities said at least 37 people were killed in that attack, including children. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis have been rallying in Tel Aviv and other cities to demand that the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reach a hostage deal in Gaza. Families of the hostages are angry that Israel's fight with Hezbollah could detract from efforts to bring their loved ones home.
This is Sky News, the headlines. Israel launches another wave of strikes on Lebanon ahead of what it says are planned Hezbollah attacks on Israeli territory.
Inconceivable that any airstrike in this area would not have impacted heavily a large number of civilians. The area is surrounded by residential blocks.
In Gaza, 22 Palestinians are killed as Israel hits a school being used as a shelter. Also, Daniel Dubois knocks out Anthony Joshua in a sensational world heavyweight title fight at Wembley. The lawyer representing women accusing Mohammed Al Fayed of sexual assault tells Sky News he expects many more victims to come forward. And a cruel policy. Labour's conference gets underway in Liverpool with more criticism from union leaders over the party's plans to cut winter fuel payments. Good morning, welcome to the programme. There's no sign of any lessening of the tensions in the Middle East. Last night, Israel launched another wave of strikes in southern Lebanon ahead of what it said were Hezbollah plans to fire into Israeli territory. It comes as the Israeli military says it's almost completely dismantled Hezbollah's leadership following Friday's airstrike in Beirut. But the risk of a wider conflict in the region clearly continues. The IDF carried out a number of strikes in Lebanon yesterday, targeting Hezbollah positions after killing dozens of people in southern Beirut on Friday. It follows attacks using wireless devices over the past few days. Well, Israel has also continued its strikes in Gaza. Early yesterday morning, 22 people were killed in an Israeli strike on a school where displaced people were sheltering. Israel says it was targeting Hamas militants. Our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, reports now from Beirut.
This used to be a multi-storey building. A
Ahead of regional elections on Sunday, polls showed the far-right AfD overtaking the German Chancellor's party in Brandenburg.
A second Hezbollah commander has been killed in a recent IDF attack in Lebanon.
The election campaign for a vote that could determine the fate of Germany's national government wrapped up on Friday. After strong showings in 2 other state elections in eastern Germany, the far-right Alternative for Germany might overtake Chancellor Olaf Scholz's centre-left Social Democrats in Brandenburg. Ahead of voting on Sunday, the AfD is leading on polls, followed by the SPD and the Christian Democratic Union. SPD regional head Dietmar Woidke has said he will resign from politics if the AfD win. The left-wing Sarah Wagenknecht alliance is expected to make a leap into the state parliament only months after its inception, and also following success in recent Eastern German voting. In light of double-digit poll ratings, the BSW could play a decisive role in preventing the AfD from becoming a part of a new state government, even if they come out on top. The Greens and the German Die Linke party have scored below 5% in polls and might not make it back into the state parliament.
The chance discovery of a baby hare, a leveret that had been separated from its mother, was to change Chloe Dalton's life. Rescuing it, she put her entire home at its disposal to ensure its survival, balancing her frenetic job advising foreign secretaries and Hollywood A-listers with a new appreciation of nature.
I really felt that she never belonged to me. It was just an instinct that she belonged to the wild, and that my job was to prepare her for her return to the wild. I found a very helpful website that gave some tips about how to look after leverets, and it did suggest keeping a leveret inside a cage, and I did this for a couple of nights and realised that the animal seemed to me to be extremely distressed. After literally 1 or 2 nights I removed the cage, that was it. I opened the doors of the house and this animal was free to roam from the very beginning, and I think that became the key of the relationship. She was always free to roam the house and garden, and at night I would hear her paws on the carpet under my bed as she would sort of roam around. In the daytime she would stretch out in my study across the entrance to the room and sleep there all day while I worked. I was looking at her, watching her in these first couple of months, thinking, okay, soon she will be strong enough to leave. And then one day she took the decision out of my hands by leaping over the garden wall. And I felt a real sense of grief about it, actually, much more than I expected, because animals hadn't been part of my life. I worked in politics. You know, in the book I write about the effect that she had on me and how she changed my perceptions, but I thought she was gone. And she astonished me by coming back over the wall a couple of hours later, and that became our new rhythm, that she would disappear into the wild at night. In the daytime she'd come back and sleep in the house.
And yet she did change you. You know, this was the pandemic. You'd been kind of ripped out of your normal world, Westminster, foreign policy, you know, on and off planes the whole time. You know, this was a million miles away from this natural world and this gift from the natural world. So how did that change your understanding of nature and change you?
I didn't really think of it as an obsession because I was doing all my normal work. For instance, after the fall of Kabul and return of the Taliban, you know, a big focus of my work was what was happening to women in Afghanistan. And I'd be having those phone calls and meetings, and the leveret would be sort of scurrying around in the room or sleeping in the room. So it was more the coexistence, and that for me was the beauty of the experience. When I began to study hares and read more about them, to realise that their numbers have plummeted by 80%, that in large parts of the country that you don't see them at all, that they've suffered a lot despite commitments by successive governments. The hare is the only game creature that you can shoot at any time of the year in England and Wales. There's no close season as there is in Scotland.
When they're breeding?
Yes, which means you can shoot hares while they're breeding, and if a leveret is orphaned, they don't survive.
I mean, it's incredible, really, because hares having such short lifespans in the wild, and yet she's 3.5 years old.
The story has sort of broadened, you know, has had many leverets, and her leverets have had leverets, and so now I have many more hares coming into the garden.
And even giving birth.
Hello, you're watching TRT World. I'm Aaron Armstrong. A reminder of our headlines. Israel appears to have stepped up its campaign against Hezbollah after a day of intensive attacks in southern Lebanon. Israeli military says it's been striking extensively in the south of the country, hitting almost 300 targets in the past day, including launch sites and Hezbollah infrastructure. The Qatari broadcaster Al Jazeera says its bureau in Ramallah has been raided by Israeli forces. The office has been ordered to close for 45 days. The network says heavily armed Israeli soldiers have told them to remove cameras and vacate their offices. Israel's military continues to fight on two fronts as attacks across Gaza continue. Authorities there say 22 Palestinians have been killed in an airstrike on a school sheltering displaced people. Separately, 4 health workers have been killed in the southern city of Rafah. Israeli authorities are facing a renewed wave of civil unrest as protesters intensify calls for the government to secure the release of hostages being held by Hamas. Demonstrators insist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's priority should be the captives rather than trading blows with Hezbollah. Almost weekly demonstrations have been held since the conflict began in October. An overnight curfew has been extended across Sri Lanka after polls closed in Saturday's presidential election. Police say the curfew was put in place to ensure the public safety, although authorities claim it's been the most peaceful in the country's history. Donald Trump has rejected another debate with his Democratic counterpart Kamala Harris before November's election. His comments come hours after Harris accepted CNN's invitation for a second debate. Trump, though, says it's too late, claiming Harris already had her chance.
As soon as I take off. The problem with another debate is that it's just too late. Voting has already started. She's had her chance to do it with Fox. You know, Fox invited us on, and I waited, and they turned it down, but now she wants to do a debate right before the election with CNN because she's losing badly.
And that's it for the moment. The news will continue here on TRT World.
Today, leaders of the Quad pledged to deepen cooperation on regional security, public health and climate change.
Today's discussion was very open. It was a discussion of like-minded democracies.
Hezbollah fires missiles into Israel as the IDF continues heavy airstrikes across southern Lebanon. The Israeli Defense Force orders Al Jazeera to close in the West Bank, with the Qatari network broadcasting live as soldiers storm its bureau. And crews work to extinguish a Sydney bushfire after losing their grip on a controlled burn. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. The Prime Minister has sat down with the leaders of the United States, India and Japan for a Quad summit in the US state of Delaware. In a final meeting hosted by Joe Biden, the US President has declared the group is here to stay. The leaders have pledged deeper cooperation on regional security, public health and climate change. North America Bureau Chief Jade McMillan has the details.
Joe Biden has put a number of personal touches on this Quad meeting, hosting leaders, including the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, at his old school in Delaware and having them over to his personal residence in Wilmington, which isn't far from here. In the final months of his presidency, Joe Biden is trying to emphasise the importance he has placed on this Quad grouping, which also includes India and Japan. It was elevated to the leader-to-leader level in the early days of his White House and was really seen as part of US efforts to try to counter China's expanding influence in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, there is some uncertainty ahead for the Quad. Joe Biden's decision not to seek re-election in November means that he will finish up his term in January when whoever wins that election takes over. The Japanese Prime Minister has also announced that he's stepping down and Anthony Albanese will face
a show of force designed to project power. Iran's armed forces have held a parade annually since 1980, but this year's event takes on special importance and symbolism given the high tensions in the region prompted by Israel's war on Gaza. If we are united, if we join hands, Israel the usurper will not be able to commit the crimes it's committing now in the region. During the parade, Tehran displayed its latest missiles and drones, including the Shahed 136B drone and the Fatah hypersonic missile. Tensions remain high in Iran. In May, President Ibrahim Raisi died in a chopper crash in the north of the country. At the end of July, Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran in an attack blamed on Israel. Iran has vowed retaliation. For the last 2 years, the Somali army has taken the fight to Al-Shabaab, retaking territory in the center and south of the country. But the insurgents are also fighting back, stepping up the use of improvised explosive devices or IEDs to slow the army's advance. Now, the UN is training Somali army personnel to counter the threat.
I think everyone in the room knows how serious this threat is. Just over the last 12 months, there have been some 600 IEDs, and we know the devastating impact they have on Somali communities. And we also know that the primary targets are your fellow soldiers in the SNA, are the principal targets of these IEDs. So it's crucially important that a solution be found to address this threat.
In the last 12 months, about 600 IEDs resulted in about 1,500 casualties throughout the country. We encountered numerous dangers, including enemy blockades and remote-controlled IEDs. We lost many comrades. In 2023, the army reported 378 deaths and 451 injuries from IEDs.
China's cutting-edge defense equipment stole the spotlight at the 2024 Africa Aerospace and Defense Exhibition in South Africa, drawing interest from international delegation. This is Africa's largest air show, and it opened Wednesday at an Air Force base near Pretoria.
It's very interesting to show the world that war or defense has really become highly technical, has become highly scientific, and therefore of any relevance. You have to move quicker on science and technology.
Chinese companies showcased their top defense products, including armored assault vehicles, fire strike system, air defense, and anti-missile technology.
Thank you for sparing your precious time. This is Amir Shakil. Have a good life. Bye-bye.